Hello, I'm Roger Casali from New Europeans, and I'm with Ruvi Ziegler, the chair of New Europeans UK. Hello, Ruvi. Tell us a little bit about yourself and where you're located.
Hi, Roger. Hi, great to see you here in this kind of Zoom world, connected but from afar. So I'm speaking to you from Oxford in the UK, where I've been living for the past over 13 years, and very profoundly over the last 9 months, pretty much almost. Leave it. And on a normal non-COVID time, I would be ordinarily commuting several days a week to the University of Reading, where I work as an associate professor in international refugee law. I also, as you mentioned, chair New Europeans more locally in Oxford. I chair the Oxford European Association, which the city council here created after the referendum in 2016 on a cross-party, basically unanimous basis to create a safe space for the protection and the advancement of the welfare of citizens of other EU countries living in Oxford. And generally, and I'm sure we'll come to this interview, I'm very passionate about standing up for rights of EU citizens and generally rights of everyone in society. My main area of research is issues around refugees and asylum, and so the notion that there are people out there that need people to stand up for them and with them is very much embedded in my being as an academic, as an activist, as a human rights lawyer.
Well, you're professionally very engaged with this issue, as you say, at the university, but also very grateful for your very long-standing commitment locally and nationally, internationally, in civil society through various NGOs, including New Europeans, to this issue. But Ruvi, you also have a very interesting personal story to tell about how your connection with the UK, what free movement has meant for you, for your family, and tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so in a way, all stories are similar and different in different ways when it comes to migration. But I've mentioned that I've been living in the UK and specifically in Oxford, for over 13 years. I came here to study, but not from a European country. I was born and bred in Israel to parents, both of whom originate from families who escaped Nazi persecution in the 20th century. My dad himself is a Holocaust survivor from what is now Ukraine, was then Poland, in Lviv or Lemberg. My mom's family came from Bochum, from Germany, and left after Kristallnacht. And so I had a very strong European connection, culturally, personally, even linguistically, in terms of the languages spoken at home. But I've not lived in continental Europe. And in fact, I was raised very much with an Anglophile, one might say, perspective. And so, in addition to this country having excellent universities, I had an impetus to come here to study for my higher degrees. And so I came to Oxford to read for the BCL, which is a master's in law. And initially was thinking I'm only coming here for a year, but even so, the route, as you were, as a student to come here actually did take me through continental Europe, because Germany and some other countries are now following in its footsteps, has created a method by which Jews who've been stripped of their German nationality, or their ancestors rather have been stripped of that nationality, can restore it or reclaim it under the German basic law scheme. And so I have become German prior to, or have re-become German prior to coming to the UK. And so I came to the UK substantively exercising EU freedom of movement. You might say an intergenerational freedom of movement, perhaps. And I came here, and I increasingly and consistently fell in love with living here, and I've carried on to do a doctorate. And then in 2012, at quite a significant decision point in time, when I was nearing the completion of my doctorate and had to decide where I want to go next in terms of an academic career. The UK hosted the 2012 Olympics, and for me that was quite a profound moment, because it really felt like an incredibly inclusive space at the time. I remember going to the stadium in Oxford when the Olympic torch came round, and just seeing just the diversity, the sense that everyone's together, the way in which it was projected, then the the spectacle of the opening ceremony with the NHS on all of its colours and forms celebrated, and so to me it became increasingly clear I really quite like living here and want to settle, and so I've taken up the position at Reading, which I've held since. And for several years, I think, was quite content in being political on an international level on issues around refugees and asylum, but actually, if I'm honest, just taking my European citizenship and that of everyone around me, all those 65 million British citizens, for granted. And it was really the referendum, the toxicity of the referendum and the aftermath of that referendum that brought me to become both an academic but also a political activist, as well as engage in civil society, fighting for the rights of EU citizens for what we called in New Europeans unilateral guarantees. So the campaign we held in the years after the referendum to make sure citizens of EU countries living in the UK don't fall on the wayside, and similarly Britons living in the EU, so they don't become bargaining chips in the negotiations, and more generally trying to fight for those principles of being members of the European Union that have made such a wonderful contribution to UK life and to the UK really as it's being shaped. And I imagine we'll come to this. There is a genuine, I think, regret, sorrow at what could become of the UK now that it's not just left in January this year, but is also untying itself from the very base institution of the European Union, namely the single market.
It's very, very striking what you said, Ruvi, in talking about your story. You started out talking about the Holocaust and how your father was a victim of was a survivor of the Holocaust, of course, a victim as well, a survivor, and the way in which the modern German state has given German citizenship back to people whose ancestors had it stripped from them. And of course, what's happening today can't be compared with what happened then. But nevertheless, the issue of rights being stripped away from people against their consent is very much part of the story of what's happening now. Our free movement rights are part of our EU citizenship rights, those of us who are still EU citizens, but for the British population, 65 million people, those EU citizenship rights are being stripped away. And I just wonder, from a professional point of view, from the point of view as a professor of human rights and refugee law, associate professor at Reading. What your reflections are about that? It's very unsettling and upsetting been very upsetting for the 4 million EU citizens in the UK and the 1.2 million British citizens abroad. But it's also very unnerving and unsettling for many of the 65 million of the British population who, whether they realise it or not, are having those rights stripped away, and maybe their future generations will look back and say, I want to have the same rights that my parents and my grandparents had, but they won't have those anymore. It's very unsettling and disturbing, and I wonder whether there's a human rights dimension to that at all.
Mm. Yeah, no, I think that's really quite key. I mean, I think you're highlighting a phenomenon of what the European project is about, and it's not the only thing the European project is about. And one shouldn't be rose-tinted, take a rose-tinted glasses view of the project. Obviously, has geopolitical, strategic, economic interests at heart, but it is the case that the European project, through the creation of EU citizenship, as an additional complementary feature of citizenship of a member state, not replacing it, not creating some sort of a European superstate as the scaremongers would have you, but actually giving people more rights, and rights in more spaces that enable them to realize their talents, their wishes to live and love and work and retire and travel really seamlessly across a continent. It is a grandiose, incredible feature of the European project. It's one that is unparalleled. If we're looking in other regions of the world, one only hopes, I mean, my view at least, that there will be similarly, permissive structures in North America, in South America, in Africa, in Asia, but in the Middle East, but they don't exist at the moment. Not nearly all of the unions that exist in other places tend to focus on economics, and very limited attention being given to freedom of movement. And I say all of this because, yes, I think EU citizens living in the UK and Britons and the EU have been, those who have made that move prior to the UK's departure or to the end of transition, have been addressed to a reasonable level. I mean, we have our qualms on issues like political rights, but they have had the gist of their rights protected through the withdrawal agreement and through domestic legislation. But the key losers in this game, and especially young people, are those British citizens who overnight, effectively about to lose their free movement rights, and those come with just the ability to choose an Erasmus program and just decide that you want to go and spend a year somewhere. In my academic professional context, I've done Erasmus teaching mobility. So I've taught at 2 European universities in Vienna and at the European University Institute in Florence. And we've had students going to about 10 different European institutions, and that collaboration and the sense of community and the sense of relationship, often actually leading to romantic relationships as well, that have been formed over the decades between Britons and other Europeans have been extraordinary. So that's gone, and I mean, it doesn't mean it can't be restored in future. But it's very significant, and everything that comes with it. So the whole sense that you are actually part of a bigger project, and there is a national project, there is a British project, but there is a European project, and there is an international project, and that really takes me to the wider human rights point. During the referendum and for a period after, there's been an explicit and deliberate attempt to conflate the European Union and the structure of the Council of Europe, the European Court of Human Rights, to conflate the Luxembourg Court, which is the Court of the European Union, and the Strasbourg Court, which is the European Court of Human Rights. I had the privilege and benefit of actually visiting the Strasbourg Court and also engage with parliamentarians, I believe in 2017. And the UK is a founding member of the European Convention of Human Rights and the Council of Europe, and so it at the moment remains a member. But the problem is that the rhetoric and the context in which Brexit was orchestrated and partly implemented plants some of the seeds that now put those structures in danger as well, because the core of the European Convention of Human Rights and of international human rights treaties is a sense in which states have obligations beyond their citizens, as a sense in which the universality of those rights is not contingent on a domestic parliament giving them. They are universal and they have to be given effect by parliaments, but they're not created by those parliaments. And that is very much a notion that is, I think, anathema to some of the people who advocated the Brexit project. And so I am worried that even though it's not an inevitable consequence, that there will be pressures for us to also leave that other substantive European structure that protects human rights in the whole of the continent of Europe and not just the EU, that those pressures will mount. And I think it will be incumbent on human rights lawyers, on activists, and on just every ordinary individual in towns and cities and in the country to just stand against this, because it's been a wonderful achievement to kind of tie this back as a final point to the mentioning of the Holocaust. It's been a lesson learned from the horrors of the 1930s and 40s that you need to have universal and continent-wise structures to protect human rights, to have supervision through courts, that the national project in some ways does have to be tamed. It's not eradicated, neither by the EU, certainly not by the European Convention, but it is tamed, and that taming is a space in which individuals can flourish. And I really hope the future is still bright on that level, but it's going to be a fight.
Fascinating, Ruvi. Thank you very much. And thank you for mentioning the European Convention on Human Rights, and of course reminding our viewers that Britain is still part of the European Convention on Human Rights as a condition of our membership of the much broader body, the Council of Europe. And perhaps one of the lessons learned from losing free movement rights is that we don't know what we have until it's gone. And I do hope that our viewers will take note of what you've said and remember that we are still signatories to the European Convention on Human Rights and how important that is. And you also, of course, pointed to the trope that is often said that the European Union is a state. Of course, not a state, but even in some of the declarations that are being put around at the moment. You know, we talk about some British people, including the Prime Minister, but we don't talk too much about him today, but say that this is an agreement between two sovereigns. But of course, the European Union is not a state, but that trope is still repeated today. But Europe is really not about states, as it is, as you've said to us, it's about people and their stories and how our destinies are now intertwined. And that's still the case whether Britain is inside or outside the European Union. And of course, as you pointed to, one of the things that has really helped to cement that has been the way in which young generations of Europeans, British Europeans and EU citizens from the EU27 have had the opportunity to work, study, live, travel, and as you said, in many cases fall in love, and in some cases even produce the next generation of Europeans as a result. But sadly, we're not just losing freedom of movement, we're also going to lose the opportunity for Britain. Well, most of Britain, Northern Ireland will still be part of the Erasmus programme, thank goodness, and Scotland is trying to see how it can retain its membership of Erasmus. But what do you think? You talked about your involvement as a teacher, as a professor in the Erasmus programme. What do you think the impact will be on students? And again, just at a kind of human level, it's a sad day, isn't it, to lose Erasmus?
Yeah, no, it's a terrible day in the sense that it was entirely avoidable, right? So even if you do not wish to subscribe to the overall framework by which any European can just decide one day that they want to try their luck somewhere else in the EU. And it's not that freedom of movement is entirely unqualified, but at the very first instance, you can try and make your way somewhere else where you would feel more comfortable, or you just want an adventure, or you're just allured by something, and there are no questions asked. So even if you object to that, profoundly human aspiration that the European project is helping to realize, Erasmus is really about students in different European universities having the chance to just taste for a year or a term what it feels to live and study and participate culturally in the life of another European space. Often comes with studying a different language, at least immersing yourself in a different linguistic space and food and music and all that comes with it. And there's been really an enormous success for UK universities. UK universities have been on the has been on the receiving end, as you were, of many students from continental Europe coming here. But there's been even more British citizens going and studying elsewhere in Europe, really throughout the continent, and it's had an enormous impact on, I think, a sense of community and just opening people's eyes to a different way of living and studying, and I think universities are going to lose out here in the UK. I mean, it's part of a wider effect that the Brexit has on universities. It's obviously going to become less easy for staff to come here from other European Union countries, or from European Union countries rather. It's going to be more costly for students to come here because tuition fees are now going to be leveled up rather than down. And so they will be at general and international students levels. So, the UK government is speaking about trying to create an Alan Turing replacement program to Erasmus, but there's really, it's the classic adage, right? You really don't have to replace a winning horse. Erasmus has been such a successful project It's been one that countries that are not members of the EU, like Israel, in fact, have tapped into because of the advantages that it brings to their own academic institution. Why on earth would you decide willingly to leave it is really beyond me. But yeah.
We're coming to the end of the time for our conversation, but it is a gloomy day for all the reasons you've explained to us, and you feel those very deeply because of your own story. And thank you for sharing that with us. But I just wonder whether, looking to the future, whether there is anything that you could point to that is some hope for the future, some hope for the future, and what that might be.
Yeah, no, look, I think in the end of the day, we were obviously now spending time thinking about the things that are lost, and I think it is important that we highlight those, particularly to the vast majority of the British public, who is, as we've said, the main victim of losing out, as it were, on rights that they currently have, and they may not, in all cases, be aware of, and so there is a public role in highlighting this. But at the same time, it could have been worse, right? We could have been leaving the European Union without any negotiated deal. There could have been no agreement like the withdrawal agreement on protecting rights of those who've settled. And the reality is, the fact that the country leaves the European Union does not mean all of those connections that currently exist are immediately terminated, because those connections have been formed. They've been formed over 4.5 decades of membership, and they can be strengthened in future. So even in the very thin so-called Brexit deal, there are bases on which in future relationships can be deepened. There's nothing preventing in future the British state from opting into something like Erasmus. There's nothing preventing from a British state for attempting to negotiate something similar to arrangements around freedom of movement that Switzerland has, or indeed to rejoin a structure like the European Economic Area, or even going further. Right? There's nothing preventing individuals and institutions like universities and civil society organizations from doing all they can in their respective capacities to deepen, strengthen their relationship with their European counterparts. So we can all continue to play a role. There is hope, in the sense that I think perhaps is a churlish point, but it is the case that younger people on the whole were far more likely to vote to remain in the Brexit referendum. And this tells us something. It tells us something about a future of young people wanting perhaps to reclaim those now lost rights, in the same way in which I returned to my German roots in order to be able to realize greater freedom on the European continent for myself. I think Britons may end up doing that as well.
Thank you so much. Where there is hope, there is life, and there's plenty of life still in the conversation about Britain's future relationship with Europe. Ruvi Ziegler, Associate Professor of International Refugee Law at the University of Reading and Chair of New Europeans UK. Thank you very much for this conversation, for talking to us, and all the very best to you and your students and all people that are close to you for the future as well. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Roger.